Why the world never makes sense, and that's okay. One of the oddest illusions humans carry is that we are the masters of control. We build systems, routines, and plans to tame the unpredictability of life. But the more tightly we grip, the more reality slips through our fingers. Think about weather forecasts. Satellites, algorithms, and supercomputers crunch trillions of data points, yet the prediction for next week's storm can still turn out wrong. Nature doesn't follow our rules, it laughs at them. And if something as basic as the sky defies complete prediction, how could we expect the rest of life to line up neatly? Control is a story we tell ourselves. That story works for a while, but eventually, chaos leaks in. Someone gets sick. A company collapses. A plan derails. You miss the train, the deal falls through, the friend doesn't show up. Life reminds you, again and again, that nonsense has veto power. And strangely, it's this very unpredictability that keeps things interesting. If everything unfolded exactly as planned, life would be unbearably dull. The absurdity is frustrating, yes, but it's also the spark of surprise, the ingredient that makes us pay attention. Let's zoom into everyday life. Think about traffic jams. Thousands of cars stuck on a highway, engines idling, tempers flaring. You inch forward, wondering, what's the cause? Sometimes there isn't one. The slowdown dissolves with no accident, no construction, no visible reason. Mathematicians call this a phantom jam. It's a reminder that collective behavior can create nonsense from nothing. Each driver acts individually, yet the system as a whole generates chaos. It doesn't make sense, and yet, it's part of how complex systems behave. Or consider queues. People wait in line for hours to buy the latest phone, even though their current one works fine. Fans camp outside arenas for concert tickets months in advance. From a rational standpoint, it's absurd. From a human standpoint, it's ritual. Waiting together builds anticipation, bonds strangers, and transforms an object into an experience. The nonsense becomes meaningful precisely because it's shared. Now, let's wander into the world of politics. Few arenas showcase nonsense more vividly. Leaders contradict themselves, parties flip positions, policies change with the wind of public opinion. Scandals erupt over trivialities while serious issues languish in gridlock. Politics doesn't make sense because it's not designed for logic, it's designed for persuasion, power, and survival. The theater of politics is bizarre, frustrating, and often disillusioning. But it also reflects the human condition. We are creatures of story and emotion, not purely reason. Religion, too, thrives on paradox and absurdity. Faith traditions ask believers to hold contradictory ideas, that life is both fleeting and eternal, that suffering has purpose, that the unseen is more real than the seen. Critics mock the logic, but for practitioners, the very strangeness is the point. Faith is an embrace of mystery. To demand that it makes sense is to miss its essence. Religion shows us that nonsense can be a pathway to meaning, not an obstacle. Science, ironically, teaches the same lesson. As much as it strives for clarity, science repeatedly uncovers truths that baffle intuition. Light behaves as both a particle and a wave. Time moves differently depending on speed and gravity. Quantum entanglement links particles across space instantaneously, as if distance doesn't exist. None of this makes sense in human terms, yet it's real. The universe itself operates on rules that mock our common sense. We adapt by expanding our models, but we never fully tame the weirdness. The cosmos is stranger than fiction, and that's not a poetic metaphor, it's scientific fact. Another realm of nonsense is money. Paper bills, metal coins, now digital numbers, none of them have intrinsic value. They're worth something only because we collectively pretend they are. Entire economies rise and fall on confidence, speculation, and trust in abstractions. Stock markets swing wildly on rumors, fortunes appear and vanish overnight. And yet we treat this system as solid ground. Money doesn't make sense, it's a shared hallucination. But it works, most of the time, because enough people believe. Let's talk about love again, because no subject resists logic more. People fall for partners who are bad for them, ignore those who are good, pine for those who are unavailable. They swear they'll never love again, only to fall head over heels months later. Jealousy flares without reason, attraction ignites unpredictably, and heartbreak lingers long after it should fade. Love is a nonsense engine, churning out contradictions. And yet, it's central to being human. We accept its chaos because the rewards connection, intimacy, joy outweigh the absurdity. Workplaces provide their own theater of nonsense. Meetings that could have been emails. Emails that communicate nothing. Rules that exist because that's how we've always done it. Corporate jargon like synergy and low-hanging fruit disguises the fact that nobody really knows what's happening. Offices are laboratories of organized nonsense. And yet, people derive identity, income, and even pride from them. Work doesn't always make sense, but it shapes our lives. Think about health trends. One decade, fat is the enemy. The next, carbs are. People drink detox juices, wear copper bracelets, or plunge into ice baths to reset their bodies. Some practices have evidence, others don't, but the fervor is the same. Health culture is full of nonsense because the body itself is confusing. What works for one person fails for another. We crave certainty, so we latch onto fads. The weirdness of it all is that even nonsense can sometimes help, if only through placebo. Here's another layer: technology. We invent tools to make life easier, yet often they complicate it. Smartphones promise productivity but deliver distraction. Social media connects us but also isolates. We scroll endlessly, knowing it doesn't fulfill us, yet unable to stop. It makes no sense, and yet billions participate daily. Technology reveals the absurdity of human desire. We build machines to solve problems, then let them create new ones. Even art, which we revere, thrives on nonsense. Abstract paintings fetch millions, though a child's doodle might look similar. A song with lyrics that make no literal sense can move us to tears. Theater of the absurd, surrealist cinema. Experimental novels, they delight precisely because they defy logic. Art is humanity's safe playground for nonsense. It's where we admit openly what we deny elsewhere, that life doesn't always need to make sense to matter. And finally, think about death. The ultimate contradiction. We know it's inevitable, yet we live as if we'll go on forever. We plan for retirement, buy long-term warranties, and fret about decades into the future, even though tomorrow is never guaranteed. Death doesn't make sense because consciousness can't imagine non-existence. So we invent stories, heavens, reincarnations, legacies. They may or may not be true, but they comfort us. The nonsense of death rituals is not weakness, it's resilience. So what do we do with all this nonsense? We learn to hold it lightly, to see the humor in it, to recognize that making sense is not the point. Life is not a puzzle to be solved but a poem to be lived. Nonsense is part of the design. And when you embrace it, the chaos becomes less frightening. It even becomes beautiful. Let's return to coincidence for a moment. Imagine you dream of a person you haven't seen in years, and then bump into them the next day. Rational minds call it probability. Our hearts call it fate. Which explanation is right? Both, in a way. The math shows it's chance, but our emotions assign meaning. Humans are meaning-making machines in a universe that resists meaning. That's weird, but it's also what makes us human. Another everyday absurdity is fashion. Every generation thinks its clothing choices are normal, only to be mocked by the next. Bell-bottoms, powdered wigs, skinny jeans, oversized sneakers, none of these trends make sense outside their context. Yet billions spend fortunes chasing them. Why? Because fashion isn't about logic, it's about identity, belonging, rebellion. Weirdness becomes fabric. Language offers more examples. Think of sarcasm. The words mean one thing, but the tone means the opposite. Outsiders hearing only the words miss the point entirely. Or idioms: kick the bucket, spill the beans, break a leg. None of these phrases make literal sense, but they thrive. Language itself is built on nonsense that became convention. And yet, it works. We understand each other through a system of agreed-upon absurdities. Even numbers carry strange baggage. Why do people fear the number 13 but revere 7? Why do athletes cling to lucky jerseys? Numbers are abstract symbols, but humans load them with emotional weight. It doesn't make sense, but it gives comfort. Superstition is nonsense dressed as security. Think about rituals of luck in sports. Baseball players refuse to step on chalk lines. Tennis players bounce the ball a specific number of times before serving. Fans wear lucky hats. Objectively, none of this affects the game. Subjectively, it anchors focus, eases nerves, builds community. Weirdness, once again, becomes function. Even education, which prides itself on order, hides absurdities. Students memorize facts they'll forget immediately after exams. They learn equations they'll never use. They raise hands to ask permission to use the bathroom. School is a training ground not just for knowledge, but for ritualized nonsense. And yet, we accept it, because it socializes us. The nonsense of education is as essential as the knowledge itself. Consider travel. Airports are temples of absurdity. Shoes off, belts removed, tiny bottles of liquid in plastic bags. We shuffle through scanners, then sprint to gates, only to sit for hours. The process is inconvenient, illogical, sometimes comical. Yet we do it, because the payoff stepping into new places is worth the nonsense. Travel is a reminder that the world's beauty is wrapped in absurd rituals. Another everyday absurdity is small talk. Nice weather we're having. How was your weekend? These exchanges rarely convey information, but they matter. They grease the wheels of social interaction. Without small talk, silence feels awkward. With it, people feel acknowledged. It doesn't make sense logically, but socially, it's gold. Now let's dive into the nonsense of memory. People misremember details constantly. Eyewitness testimony, once considered gold standard evidence, is riddled with errors. Entire groups can share false memories. And yet, we build our identities on these shaky recollections. Memory doesn't make sense, but without it, we'd be lost. Even the way we process grief is illogical. We know death is universal, inevitable, part of nature. Yet each loss feels like a personal violation of order. We grieve as if something unfair has happened, when in fact, it's the most equalizing reality of all. Grief doesn't make sense, but love doesn't either. And grief is love's shadow. Technology multiplies nonsense daily. We carry devices capable of accessing all human knowledge, yet we use them to send cat memes and argue with strangers. We create artificial intelligence to mimic conversation, then ask it to write poems or generate horoscopes. Rationally, it's bizarre, but emotionally, it scratches our itch for play, curiosity, connection. Weirdness is the hidden engine of innovation. Another nonsensical domain is economics. Consider how entire financial markets swing on rumors, moods, and gut feelings. Traders panic over whispers, rejoice over speculation, and billions of dollars evaporate or appear. Rational models crumble in the face of human emotion. The global economy, supposedly the pinnacle of rational planning, is often driven by collective nonsense. Even morality, which feels solid, is laced with contradiction. One culture eats pigs but reveres cows. Another does the opposite. One era praises duels for honor. Another condemns them as murder. What makes sense in one context is nonsense in another. And yet, people cling to their moral codes as universal. The truth is stranger. Morality is woven from history, culture, and chance. So what do we do with all this? We stop demanding perfect sense. The world never promised us coherence. Instead, it offered us absurdity and asked us to make something of it. That's what humans do best. We take nonsense and turn it into stories, rituals, jokes, traditions. We create art out of chaos, hope out of randomness, connection out of contradiction. The world never makes sense. It never has. But maybe that's the invitation to stop chasing order like a finish line and start dancing with the absurdity. Because in the nonsense, we find freedom. In the nonsense, we find each other. And in the nonsense, life becomes not just tolerable, but beautiful. One of the most confusing aspects of life is how randomness and structure coexist in constant tension. On one hand, we crave patterns. We design schedules, build cities and grids, and write laws to regulate behavior. On the other, the universe keeps reminding us that it doesn't run on our rules. Accidents happen. People act unpredictably. Nature intervenes. And when those collisions occur, we scramble to explain them, often inventing stories where none exists. Think about weather again. We name hurricanes, track their paths, and warn people to evacuate. But even with the best technology, storms still surprise us. A hurricane weakens at the last minute, or veers in an unexpected direction. Entire communities make decisions based on predictions that don't pan out. And yet, we continue the ritual, because the alternative, admitting we don't know, is too unsettling. Humans hate blank spaces. We would rather fill them with nonsense than leave them empty. This desire for explanation shows up in smaller ways too. When something breaks, like your laptop or your car, and the repair person says, "It just happens sometimes," you feel cheated. That answer doesn't satisfy. We want causes, reasons, villains. Random malfunction feels like an insult to our need for order. And so, we invent scapegoats, the company, the mechanic, the universe conspiring against us. The nonsense of blame feels better than the nonsense of chance. Consider relationships. Two people fall in love, convinced it's fate. A decade later, they break up, citing irreconcilable differences. Both stories, the destined romance and the tragic ending, are narratives imposed on events that may never have had clear reasons. People drift apart, change, or make mistakes. But instead of accepting the mess, we insist on explanations. "We weren't meant to be. I fell out of love." These phrases are tidy covers for the untidy truth that relationships often don't make sense. And that's okay. Workplaces amplify this tendency. A company launches a product, it fails, and consultants rush to analyze why. They publish articles about mismanagement, poor marketing, bad timing. But sometimes, the truth is simpler. The world is unpredictable. Consumers act irrationally. Markets shift unexpectedly. Nonsense wins. Yet we rarely accept that answer. Postmortems always demand causality, even if it's manufactured. History itself is rewritten this way. After major events, people look back and draw straight lines between cause and effect. But real life is more like tangled spaghetti. Revolutions, inventions, and cultural shifts often arise from accidents, coincidences, or small triggers no one could have predicted. Yet textbooks present them as inevitable, as if the world makes sense in hindsight. That illusion comforts us, but it hides the chaos. Another arena where nonsense thrives is technology. Consider the internet. It was invented for researchers to share information. Now it's dominated by memes, influencers, cat videos, and online shopping. No one planned that. The internet doesn't make sense. It evolved like a bizarre organism, mutating in directions nobody foresaw. And yet, here we are, building our lives around it. That's the thing about nonsense. Once enough people participate, it becomes normal. Take social media. Why do people share photos of their meals, record dances, or post daily affirmations? From a rational standpoint, it's strange. From a human standpoint, it's community. We create tribes around nonsense. Hashtags become movements. Viral jokes influence elections. The internet proves that nonsense isn't peripheral to life, it's central. Even science admits nonsense into its halls. Dark matter and dark energy, for example, make up most of the universe, yet we don't know what they are. Scientists call them placeholders for mysteries. That's a fancy way of saying we have no idea. And still, we build models, write equations, and launch telescopes, knowing the cosmos doesn't fit neatly into sense-making. Science is honest nonsense. It admits the gaps but keeps going anyway. Think about the nonsense of everyday rituals. Blowing out candles on a cake to make a wish. Knocking on wood to avoid bad luck. Crossing fingers. None of these acts change reality, but they soothe us. They transform uncertainty into a performance of control. Weirdly, the rituals work not because they alter the universe, but because they alter us. They ease our anxiety, shift our focus, and make chaos feel less threatening. Money, too, is ritualized nonsense. People trade green paper or digital numbers for houses, cars, and food. Entire lives revolve around chasing this abstraction. Economies wobble on speculation and mood. Cryptocurrency pushes the absurdity further. Digital tokens with no physical form, worth billions. Money doesn't make sense, but it doesn't need to. It functions because we all agree to participate in the game. Let's explore morality again. Why do we shake hands as a sign of trust? Some say it originated to show you weren't holding a weapon. Today, it's meaningless in that context, yet it persists. Morality is often an accumulation of outdated rituals. What once made sense in one era lingers nonsensically in another. Yet we treat these rituals as sacred. They don't make sense, but they bind us together. The nonsense of beauty is another puzzle. Why do we find symmetry attractive? Why do certain body shapes trend while others fall out of favor? Why does one culture prize pale skin while another prizes tan skin? Beauty is inconsistent, shifting, and arbitrary. Yet people spend fortunes chasing it, as if it were absolute. The weirdness is that beauty is both real and unreal. It influences lives profoundly, but it's built on nonsense. Now let's tackle the nonsense of productivity. People obsess over hacks, apps, and routines to squeeze more out of every day. Yet many of these systems become rituals in themselves. Color-coded planners, bullet journals, time-blocking charts, they give the illusion of control, but often create more work than they save. Productivity culture is nonsense disguised as efficiency, and yet, it helps people feel purposeful. The nonsense itself is productive in an emotional sense, if not a practical one. Death highlights nonsense in the starkest way. We know it's inevitable, yet we avoid thinking about it. We invent euphemisms, passed away, gone to a better place, to soften the blow. Funerals, cemeteries, and rituals that don't make sense to the dead but comfort the living. Death defies explanation, so we wrap it in symbols. Nonsense becomes necessity. Here's a peculiar paradox: nonsense can be healing. When someone tells you a joke during grief, or when absurd humor breaks tension in a hospital waiting room, it doesn't erase the pain but it makes it bearable. Laughter and nonsense act as pressure valves. They don't make sense in dark moments, yet they're exactly what we need. So maybe nonsense is not the enemy of order, but its partner. We live between the two, constantly negotiating. We invent sense to mask nonsense, and nonsense to balance sense. The world never fully aligns, and that's okay. In fact, that's what makes it alive. Why the world never makes sense, and that's okay. Part 3.2, approximately 1700 words. Let's dive deeper into how nonsense is not just tolerated but celebrated. Think about festivals. Entire cities shut down so people can throw colored powder, wear elaborate costumes, or dance until sunrise. Mardi Gras, Holi, Carnival, all beautiful, all wildly illogical. People save money, plan for months, and exhaust themselves for no practical reason. Yet these nonsensical explosions of joy remind us that life is not about sense, it's about vibrancy. Sports fans embody a similar paradox. Rationally, whether a ball crosses a line or not has no impact on your personal life. Yet millions scream, cry, and riot over results. Jerseys become sacred cloth, rivalries split families, and chants echo like ancient rituals. Sports don't make sense, but they fulfill deep needs for belonging, identity, and drama. Nonsense becomes community glue. Even work, which we think of as serious, is layered with ritual absurdities. Office birthday parties, motivational posters, jargon-filled emails. These things rarely increase productivity, but they shape culture. A worker may feel valued not because of a paycheck but because someone remembered their favorite cake. That doesn't make sense in purely economic terms, but it makes perfect sense emotionally. Relationships are no less nonsensical. Couples invent private languages, inside jokes, and habits that would baffle outsiders. A pair might insist on eating pizza on Fridays or watching the same movie every anniversary. Objectively pointless, subjectively priceless. Shared nonsense is intimacy. It's what transforms strangers into us. Family traditions take this further. Why do some families insist on a specific dish at Thanksgiving, or a certain ornament on the tree, or singing a silly song at birthdays? These rituals often have no rational basis, but they bind generations. The nonsense is the point. It's continuity disguised as quirk. Think about how we use objects as anchors. A teddy bear, a lucky pen, a faded concert ticket. These items hold meaning far beyond their physical reality. They are vessels of nonsense. We imbue them with significance they don't inherently possess. Yet they comfort us, connect us to memory, and remind us of identity. Without nonsense, objects would just be things. With it, they become treasures. Technology multiplies this habit. People curate digital avatars, obsess over follower counts, and argue passionately about imaginary points in video games. From the outside, it's absurd. Inside, it's deeply real. Digital nonsense feels tangible because emotion makes it so. Humans are experts at turning imagination into reality. Even science fiction reveals this. Entire fandoms build their own worlds that don't exist: Star Trek, Star Wars, Middle-earth. Fans write encyclopedias, learn invented languages, and debate fictional histories as if they were real. It doesn't make sense, but it builds meaning, community, even careers. Nonsense fuels creativity on a massive scale. Education rituals highlight this tension. Graduation robes trace back centuries, yet we still wear them. Throwing caps in the air has no practical effect, but it feels essential. The nonsense makes the milestone memorable. Without ritual, it would just be paperwork. Now consider politics again. Campaign rallies look like concerts, complete with chants, songs, and symbols. Logic might suggest focusing on policies, but emotion demands theater. Flags waves, slogans repeat, and the crowd unites in ritual. Politics thrives not on sense but on spectacle. That's why nonsense isn't a side effect, it's the fuel. Death rituals, too, are soaked in paradox. Why place flowers on graves? Why whisper to the dead? Rationally, it achieves nothing. Emotionally, it heals. Grief refuses to obey logic, so we meet it with ritual nonsense. It doesn't make sense, but it makes life bearable. And finally, think about how we live with uncertainty. Every day, we cross streets not knowing if cars will stop. We eat food trusting it's safe. We make plans for tomorrow without guarantees. Life is a gamble wrapped in routine. The nonsense is hidden in plain sight. We act as if certainty exists when it doesn't, but perhaps that's courage. To keep moving despite the absurdity is the essence of being human. So when we say the world doesn't make sense, we're not despairing, we're describing reality. And when we say that's okay, we're offering the antidote. Because the nonsense isn't a problem to be solved. It's a texture to be lived. The truth is, nonsense makes life richer. It gives us stories to tell, jokes to share, rituals to repeat. It shapes art, love, and memory. If everything made sense, there'd be no surprises, no wonder, no laughter. The world's refusal to align neatly with reason is not a flaw. It's the feature that keeps us alive, curious, and connected. One of the strangest illusions people cling to is that logic is the highest form of truth. We admire consistency, worship rationality, and dismiss anything that smells of contradiction. Yet the most meaningful parts of life refuse to fit into tidy equations. Love contradicts reason. Art defies logic. Even science, our most rational tool, leads us into mysteries that bend common sense. The world's refusal to behave like a textbook is frustrating and freeing, because it means we are not trapped in formulas. We are invited into paradox. Take morality. Philosophers have argued for centuries about right and wrong, but cultures contradict each other constantly. One society celebrates polygamy, another criminalizes it. One era praises dueling for honor, another condemns it as barbaric. Even within a single culture, values shift. A few decades ago, smoking was fashionable. Today, it's shameful. We like to think morality is fixed, but it's a moving target shaped by history, power, and chance. That doesn't mean morality is meaningless. It means morality is alive, breathing nonsense into order. Think about humor. Why do we laugh? A pun is just a glitch in language. A pratfall is someone's pain. Sarcasm is saying the opposite of what we mean. Objectively, none of this should be funny. Yet humor is essential. It builds bonds, eases tension, and helps us survive despair. Jokes make no sense, but they make life bearable. That paradox is precisely why humor feels so human. Now consider dreams. You spend a third of your life asleep, much of it in worlds that make no sense. Flying without wings, meeting long-dead relatives, walking through houses that don't exist. Dreams are nonsense at scale, yet they leave residues of emotion that linger through waking life. You might wake exhilarated, terrified, or heartbroken, all from a story your brain invented. If the world were pure logic, why would dreaming exist? Dreams prove that nonsense is woven into our biology. Relationships, too, resist reason. Think about how we choose partners. People claim to want stability, kindness, or shared values, yet often fall for danger, unpredictability, or pure chemistry. Rational checklists rarely match emotional choices. Love stories are full of nonsense, people from different backgrounds, unlikely coincidences, improbable connections. And yet, those stories shape our lives more than any logical plan ever could. The nonsense of romance is not a flaw, it's the pulse of intimacy. Culture multiplies nonsense until it becomes invisible. Fashion cycles through absurdities: powdered wigs, corsets, parachute pants. At the time, they feel inevitable. In hindsight, they look ridiculous. But every generation insists its nonsense is normal. That's the funny thing about culture: today's sense is tomorrow's nonsense, and vice versa. The same applies to food, music, slang. Trends rise and fall on waves of collective absurdity. Culture doesn't make sense, it dances with nonsense. Think about work culture. Offices are full of rituals that look ridiculous if you step back: shaking hands, passing business cards, singing happy birthday in break rooms. Meetings drag on without purpose, emails pile up, jargon clouds meaning. Yet these rituals persist because they give shape to time. Work is not just about productivity, it's about participating in shared nonsense that reassures us we belong. Money might be the most powerful nonsense of all. Strips of paper, chunks of metal, now digital code, none of it has inherent value. But because we believe, the illusion becomes real. Wars are fought, lives are lost, families rise and fall all over numbers in banks. Economies tremble because of confidence, panic, or rumor. If aliens arrived, they'd laugh at the sight of humans trading their lives for shiny coins or glowing screens. Yet this nonsense binds the planet together. Religion takes nonsense and sanctifies it. People gather weekly to sing songs, recite words, and tell stories about unseen realities. Outsiders scoff at the logic. Insiders call it sacred. Faith thrives not because it makes sense, but because it gives meaning where sense fails. The paradox of belief is that its power lies in its irrationality. People are willing to live and die for ideas that defy evidence. And perhaps that is its point. Faith admits what reason cannot, that nonsense may be the doorway to truth. Let's explore coincidence. You think of an old friend and suddenly they call. You see the same number everywhere for a week. Rational minds shrug, probability. Emotional minds whisper, destiny. Neither is wrong. The universe doesn't make sense, but humans can't resist pattern seeking. We stitch nonsense into story, and story into meaning. Coincidences feel magical because they let us pretend chaos has intention. Even if it doesn't, the feeling matters. Another strange arena is superstition. Crossing fingers, avoiding ladders, throwing salt over shoulders. None of it changes outcomes, yet people swear by it. Athletes wear lucky socks. Actors whisper break a leg. Students clutch charms during exams. These rituals don't make sense, but they provide comfort. And comfort is a form of truth. Sometimes nonsense works, not because it alters reality, but because it alters us. Consider nostalgia. Why do we yearn for the past, even when it wasn't that great? We romanticize childhood summers, first loves, simpler times. Memory edits out the boredom and pain, leaving a highlight reel. Nostalgia is nonsense. It convinces us the past was golden when it wasn't. But it serves a purpose. It soothes, connects, and inspires us to recreate joy. Art thrives on nonsense. Abstract paintings, surrealist films, experimental music, they resist literal meaning. Yet people cry before canvases, feel shaken by strange cinema, or find solace in discordant chords. Art's power lies in its refusal to be logical. It taps into emotion, bypassing reason. Nonsense here is not failure, it's freedom. Even science, our temple of reason, embraces nonsense. Quantum mechanics tells us particles exist in multiple states at once. Relativity tells us time bends. These truths mock common sense. And yet, they are real. The universe itself runs on rules that defy logic. Science advances by confronting nonsense and expanding our models. Logic is not erased, but stretched. The weirdness of the cosmos is proof that sense is overrated. Finally, let's reflect on mortality. Death makes no sense. Consciousness vanishes, bodies return to dust, and yet the world goes on. We cannot comprehend our own absence, so we invent stories: heavens, reincarnations, legacies. These stories may be nonsense, but they are essential. They comfort the living, honor the dead, and soften the unbearable. Death resists logic, but nonsense makes it survivable. So when people say, "I just want life to make sense," I smile. Because if life did make sense, it would be unbearably flat. Nonsense is not the enemy, it's the spice. It gives us laughter, beauty, love, hope. The world doesn't make sense, and that's okay. That's what makes it worth living. One of the strangest truths about nonsense is how it creates order out of chaos, even while looking like the opposite. Festivals, superstitions, jokes, and rituals don't fix problems, but they give people a sense of stability. It's paradoxical. Irrational acts produce rational comfort. Imagine a child clutching a stuffed animal during a storm. The toy has no magical powers, yet it protects the child emotionally. Adults are no different. We cling to nonsense lucky charms, mantras, traditions because they steady us against the absurdity of existence. Take the phenomenon of gossip. Rationally, gossip is wasteful talking about people who aren't present, speculating, exaggerating. Yet gossip enforces social rules, spreads information, and bonds groups. The nonsense of idle chatter actually sustains communities. We don't just share facts. We share nonsense, and that nonsense keeps us woven together. Consider bureaucracy. Endless forms, signatures, and rules that contradict each other. Bureaucracy is maddening precisely because it doesn't make sense. Yet, paradoxically, it holds societies together. The nonsense of paperwork convinces us that systems are fair, even when they're not. It's ritual masquerading as order. People rail against it, but also trust it. Nonsense becomes stability. Even leisure thrives on nonsense. Think about hobbies. People spend thousands building model trains, collecting comic books, or knitting sweaters nobody needs. Objectively, these activities don't solve hunger, war, or disease. But subjectively, they make life meaningful. Hobbies are nonsense that heals. They remind us we're alive for more than survival. Food culture is another buffet of absurdity. Why do we insist on 3 meals a day, when historically people ate at irregular times? Why do some cultures eat insects, while others gag at the idea? Why does one society prize wine while another prohibits it? Food doesn't just nourish, it encodes nonsense into ritual. Table manners, recipes, holiday feasts, all arbitrary, yet sacred. Eating is never just about calories. It's about meaning layered on nonsense. Travel offers its own comedy. People fly thousands of miles to sit on beaches that look remarkably similar to the ones back home. They endure airports, jet lag, and expenses just to take photos in new places. Rationally, it's nonsense. But emotionally, it transforms us. Travel reminds us the world is bigger than our routines. The nonsense of tourism broadens perspective. The arts magnify nonsense deliberately. Avant-garde theater stages plays with no plot. Experimental music embraces dissonance. Abstract paintings depict shapes that defy recognition. Audiences scratch their heads, critics argue, and yet people return. Why? Because the nonsense of art gives permission to explore beyond logic. It opens doors reason can't. Sports, too, are nonsense disguised as drama. Millions invest emotional energy in people throwing balls into nets or hitting them with sticks. Whole economies revolve around it. Why? Because sports compress life's absurdities into a stage where rules exist but outcomes remain uncertain. The nonsense feels safe, structured, exhilarating. Even medicine carries contradictions. Placebos, sugar pills with no active ingredients, sometimes cure symptoms. Patients know, on paper, it's nonsense, yet their bodies respond. The placebo effect proves that nonsense can heal. Rationalists squirm at the thought, but it's undeniable. Belief itself has power, even if it makes no sense. Think about time zones. The Earth spins continuously, yet we slice it into 24 sections and pretend midnight happens at different moments depending on where you stand. Rationally, it's arbitrary. But without this nonsense, global coordination would collapse. Time zones don't make sense in nature, but they make civilization possible. Or consider measurement systems. Why is water freezing at 0 degrees Celsius but 32 Fahrenheit? Why is a mile longer than a kilometer? Measurement should be objective, but it's riddled with historical accidents. We treat these systems as sacred, forgetting they're arbitrary. Nonsense disguised as precision. Even identity is shaped by nonsense. You are who your documents say you are. Your name, nationality, gender marker. Change the paperwork, and society sees you differently. Identity feels permanent, but it's paper thin. Nonsense defines how we move through the world. All of this might sound bleak, like nonsense rules us. But that's the beauty. Once you see it, you're free. You no longer need the world to make perfect sense. You can laugh at its contradictions, embrace its absurdities, and build your own meaning. Nonsense doesn't diminish life, it deepens it. So yes, the world refuses to align with logic. But that refusal is not failure. It's invitation. An invitation to play, to imagine, to create rituals, to love despite contradictions, to laugh at the absurd, to keep going even when nothing adds up. The world doesn't make sense, and thank goodness. If it did, it would be unbearably dull. One of the strangest things about being human is how often we accept nonsense as normal without realizing it. The rituals, the traditions, the little contradictions of daily life, we carry them out automatically, rarely pausing to ask, does this even make sense? And if we do pause, we often laugh and keep going. Maybe that's the quiet secret of existence. We survive not by making sense of the world, but by learning to live comfortably inside its contradictions. Take birthdays. Every year, people gather around a cake, stick candles in it, sing a song, and then blow spit all over it before everyone eats. Rationally, this is absurd, yet we cherish it. The nonsense doesn't diminish the ritual, it enhances it. The strangeness makes it memorable, and the memory makes it meaningful. That's the pattern we find again and again. Nonsense transforms into meaning through repetition and community. Holidays exaggerate this. Entire cultures shut down for rituals that, on the surface, defy reason. Why decorate a tree in winter? Why paint eggs in spring? Why give gifts on one specific day rather than another? These acts make no rational sense, but they provide rhythm to the year, texture to time. Without them, life would feel like an endless blur. The nonsense gives shape to existence. Food culture takes nonsense to another level. Why do we eat pancakes for breakfast but steak for dinner? Why are some animals food and others pets? Why is it polite to slurp noodles in Japan but rude in the United States? Food rules are arbitrary, inconsistent, and contradictory. But people follow them religiously, often without questioning. Nonsense becomes etiquette, and etiquette becomes identity. Even our sense of beauty is steeped in nonsense. In one era, pale skin was prized. In another, tans became fashionable. In some cultures, bigger bodies symbolize wealth and fertility. In others, thinness is idolized. Beauty standards change like weather, yet people chase them with ferocity, spending fortunes on cosmetics, clothing, surgery. Objectively, it's nonsense. Subjectively, it defines lives. Beauty is a social hallucination we all agree to share. Think about our obsession with productivity. People wake up at 5 a.m., drink green smoothies, fill planners with color-coded blocks of time, and boast about how many emails they've answered. Rationally, much of this is performative nonsense. It often adds stress instead of reducing it. But productivity culture gives people a sense of control in a chaotic world. Even nonsense routines can feel like anchors in stormy seas. Technology, the great tool of modernity, creates its own brands of nonsense. We carry devices capable of accessing all human knowledge, yet most of us use them to watch cat videos, argue in comment sections, or count likes. Smartphones promise efficiency but deliver distraction. Social media offers connection but often breeds loneliness. The contradictions are glaring, and yet, billions log in daily. Technology doesn't make sense, but it scratches the itch of our desires, however contradictory they may be. Money might be the crown jewel of nonsense. Paper bills, coins, and now digital numbers with no physical form, all considered precious. The global economy is a collective game of make-believe. We trade our time, energy, and even lives for numbers in accounts. Stock markets rise and fall not just on production, but on moods, rumors, and hunches. Entire nations tremble because confidence wavers. Money makes no intrinsic sense, but it organizes civilization. It's nonsense with power. Superstition provides another lens. Why do athletes wear the same socks every game? Why do people knock on wood or avoid walking under ladders? Why throw salt over a shoulder or wish on eyelashes? None of this changes reality, but it changes how we feel about reality. Superstition is nonsense disguised as control. And sometimes, that illusion is enough to calm the mind. Consider language. We treat it as logical, but it's riddled with absurdities. Why is red in English pronounced differently in present and past tense, even though it's spelled the same? Why do we say drive on a parkway but park in a driveway? Why does fast mean both quick and not moving? Language isn't logical, it's evolutionary nonsense that somehow works. It's a tool built from accidents, mispronunciations, and metaphors that overstayed their welcome. Then there's the nonsense of fashion. Bell bottoms, shoulder pads, skinny jeans. Each trend looked inevitable in its moment and absurd in hindsight. People spend fortunes chasing styles that will be mocked within a decade. Fashion is nonsense institutionalized, but it's also joy. It allows self-expression, identity, and play. The nonsense is what makes it fun. Relationships thrive on nonsense. Couples invent pet names, private jokes, rituals that would puzzle outsiders. Friends laugh until they cry over references that no one else would understand. These shared absurdities create intimacy. They don't need to make sense because their power is in belonging, not logic. The nonsense is the glue. Even grief, one of the deepest human experiences, is steeped in nonsense. We dress bodies in special clothes, bury them in boxes, place flowers on graves, speak to the departed as if they could hear. Rationally, the dead don't notice. But these rituals help the living survive. The nonsense comforts, dignifies, and heals. Art leans fully into nonsense. Abstract paintings, surrealist films, experimental music all defy logic. And yet, they move us. People stand before a canvas splattered with paint and feel profound emotion. They listen to songs with incomprehensible lyrics and find comfort. Art thrives on nonsense because it bypasses reason and touches emotion directly. Even science, our most rational pursuit, embraces paradox. Quantum mechanics tells us particles can exist in multiple states at once. Relativity tells us time is flexible. These truths contradict common sense, but they're real. Science advances by confronting nonsense and expanding our models. The universe itself refuses to conform to our tidy logic. Finally, death highlights the ultimate nonsense. Consciousness flickers out, bodies decay, and yet we cannot comprehend our own non-existence. We invent heavens, reincarnations, legacy stories to soften the blow. Rationally, none of it is certain, but emotionally, it sustains us. Nonsense doesn't erase mortality, but it makes it bearable. The more you look, the clearer it becomes. Life is nonsense all the way down. But that's not a curse, it's a gift. Nonsense gives us laughter, love, beauty, ritual, and meaning. If everything made sense, life would be flat and predictable. It's the nonsense that makes it worth living. Another curious form of nonsense is nostalgia for things we never experienced. People romanticize decades they weren't alive for: the roaring 20s, the 60s, the 80s. They watch movies, listen to music, wear retro clothes, and feel a longing for an imagined past. Rationally, it makes no sense to miss what you never lived. But emotionally, it's powerful. Nostalgia gives people roots, even if borrowed. It shows how nonsense can provide a sense of belonging across time. Entertainment thrives on this. Consider superhero films. Grown adults watch stories of people in costumes with impossible powers, and entire economies revolve around it. Rationally, it's absurd. But these stories provide hope, excitement, and moral lessons. The nonsense resonates because it points to truths beyond literal reality. Take conspiracy theories. They flourish because people can't tolerate randomness. When events seem senseless, some invent elaborate plots to explain them. Conspiracies rarely make sense, but they comfort believers by offering order. It's easier to believe in hidden masterminds than in chaotic chance. Nonsense, once again, becomes a psychological shield. Ritualized nonsense shows up in sports fans. Painting faces, waving foam fingers, chanting in unison. None of it changes the outcome of the game, yet it feels essential. Fans bond through shared absurdity. The nonsense becomes identity. We won, even though the fans never touched the ball. Even in science, nonsense creeps in through uncertainty. Dark matter and dark energy, concepts invented to explain what we don't understand, are placeholders for mystery. Scientists admit, we don't know, but cloak it in technical terms. That's not dishonesty. It's a reminder that the universe defies sense. Our best tools are sometimes elegant nonsense, scaffolding until clearer truths arrive. Education is full of similar contradictions. Why do students memorize dates they can easily look up? Why do they diagram sentences in ways no one uses in real writing? Why do they raise hands to ask permission for basic needs? School is partly nonsense, but it socializes us. It trains patience, cooperation, and endurance. The nonsense is functional. Consider bureaucracy. People file forms, get stamps, and wait in lines. Often, the rules contradict each other. Rationally, it's maddening. But bureaucracy provides the illusion of fairness. Everyone suffers equally in the paperwork maze. The nonsense convinces us the system works. Relationships are riddled with nonsense. People argue over toilet seat positions, remote controls, or dishwashing methods. Couples create rituals that outsiders would find baffling: special greetings, secret songs, silly dances. None of it matters logically, but emotionally, it's gold. The nonsense sustains connection. Even grief rituals defy logic. We whisper to photos, keep belongings of the dead, visit graves. Rationally, the departed don't notice. But the rituals help the living heal. The nonsense bridges the unbearable gap of loss. Play highlights nonsense beautifully. Children turn sticks into swords, boxes into castles. Adults play video games, solve puzzles, or watch sitcoms. Play has no survival value, yet it refreshes the mind and bonds people. The nonsense of play may be essential to human flourishing. Coincidence fascinates us. Meeting a stranger who shares your birthday, dreaming of someone who then calls, hearing the same phrase repeatedly in a week. Rationally, probability explains it, but emotionally, it feels like fate. The nonsense comforts us with a sense of connection to something larger. Even silence is nonsense in disguise. People feel awkward in quiet moments, rushing to fill them with chatter. Yet silence can also be sacred. Monks, artists, and lovers know this. The paradox is that the same nonsense and absence of sound can feel unbearable or holy. Consider our relationship with time. We chop it into seconds, minutes, hours, arbitrary units. We celebrate birthdays, anniversaries, New Year's. Rationally, the earth just spins. But the nonsense gives rhythm to existence. It allows us to pause, reflect, and start again. In the end, nonsense is not the enemy of reason but its companion. Logic organizes, nonsense enlivens. Reason builds systems, nonsense gives them soul. The world doesn't make sense, and maybe that's its greatest gift. Because in the nonsense we find humor, intimacy, art, ritual, hope. Without nonsense, life would be unbearable in its cold efficiency. So embrace it. Laugh at the absurdities, cherish the contradictions, create your own rituals. The world won't ever line up neatly, and that's okay. That's what makes it worth inhabiting. By now, we've wandered through history, science, culture, rituals, and daily habits, all the places where life refuses to behave logically. But in this final stretch, I want to step back and ask a deeper question. What would it even mean for the world to make sense? We talk about sense as if it's an attainable standard, but whose sense are we talking about? Yours, mine, the philosophers, the scientists. The truth is, sense itself is slippery. What feels perfectly logical in one culture, century, or household may look ridiculous in another. In that way, the pursuit of universal sense is doomed from the start. And maybe that's good news. Consider morality. A society might declare certain foods unclean, certain clothes inappropriate, or certain words forbidden. To insiders, these rules feel obvious. To outsiders, they seem nonsensical. Yet each system serves a purpose, to create belonging and identity. Morality doesn't make sense universally, it makes sense locally. The nonsense is what gives it flavor. Think about art again. If sense were the ultimate measure, then only realistic paintings would matter. Abstract expressionism, surrealism, impressionism gone. Yet those nonsensical movements revealed emotional truths that realism couldn't touch. A canvas of chaotic strokes can feel more honest than a perfect portrait. Art proves that nonsense often speaks in a language deeper than logic. Even science thrives on this paradox. Every major breakthrough began as nonsense to someone. Galileo's heliocentrism, Darwin's evolution, Einstein's relativity, all dismissed as absurd in their time. Today, they're foundational. Tomorrow, parts of them may look quaint. Science doesn't eliminate nonsense. It negotiates with it. Knowledge expands by embracing ideas that first appear illogical. Relationships magnify this principle. Why does one person fall in love with another? Why do friendships spark in unlikely places? There's no formula. Dating apps try to calculate compatibility, but chemistry laughs at algorithms. People connect through shared nonsense, inside jokes, silly habits, quirks that defy explanation. Love is not sensible, but it's real. In fact, its nonsense is what makes it precious. Then there's the nonsense of hope. Rationally, many situations look bleak. People face illness, poverty, or despair with little evidence of improvement. Yet hope persists. People imagine brighter futures, make plans, and work toward them, often against all odds. Hope doesn't make sense, but it saves lives. It pulls us forward when logic says we should give up. Hope is nonsense that heals. Consider rituals of beginnings. Why do we celebrate New Year's with fireworks? Why do students wear caps and gowns at graduations? Why do couples throw rice at weddings? These customs don't make rational sense, but they mark thresholds. They say, something has changed. Humans need markers, even if they're arbitrary. The nonsense of ritual transforms transition into meaning. Coincidences also reveal our hunger for sense. You think of someone, and they call. You notice the same number everywhere. Statistically, these events are inevitable in a vast world, yet we interpret them as signs. And maybe they are, not because the universe arranged them, but because we choose to see them that way. Nonsense becomes significance when we give it weight. Think about time itself. We act as if it flows in straight lines, divided into hours and minutes. But physics tells us it bends, stretches, and folds. Even our daily experience proves this. Time flies when you're having fun, crawls when you're bored. The nonsense of subjective time is as real as any clock. And yet, we cling to calendars, schedules, and alarms to keep us grounded. Sense is a map. Nonsense is the terrain. The body, too, is full of contradictions. We hiccup for no clear reason. We sneeze in sunlight. We grow wisdom teeth we don't need. Evolution left us with leftover parts and glitches. Yet we treat the body as if it were a perfectly designed machine. Nonsense in biology reminds us that survival doesn't require perfection, just good enough. Grief underscores the point. Death is inevitable, yet each loss feels unfair. We dress bodies, build coffins, carve headstones, and visit graves. Rationally, these acts change nothing. Emotionally, they change everything. The nonsense of mourning rituals sustains the living. Without them, grief would be unbearable. And then there's laughter. Try to explain a joke to someone who doesn't get it, and it collapses. Humor thrives on nonsense, wordplay, exaggeration, absurdity. We laugh at things that don't add up, and the laughter bonds us. Humor is humanity's way of saying, yes, the world is nonsense, but let's enjoy it together. In the end, sense is overrated. The world doesn't make sense, and maybe that's what makes it beautiful. Nonsense gives us art, love, laughter, ritual, and hope. Without it, life would be a sterile equation. With it, life is messy, unpredictable, and alive. So here's the paradox to carry with you. The nonsense doesn't need to be solved. It needs to be lived. That's the point. Let's push further into this paradox of sense and nonsense. Imagine a universe where everything did make sense. No surprises, no contradictions, no mysteries. Every question had a clear answer, every action a predictable outcome. Life would run like a machine, efficient, logical, and utterly boring. Wonder would vanish, curiosity would die, art would dry up. What makes life rich is precisely its refusal to conform to strict reason. The nonsense is the space where creativity, humor, and possibility live. Take art. A perfectly realistic painting might impress with skill, but a surreal dreamscape unlocks emotions that logic can't touch. A song with nonsense lyrics, syllables without meaning, can still make us cry. A play with absurd characters can reveal more about human nature than a neat drama ever could. Nonsense frees art from the prison of explanation. It lets us feel before we understand. Or think about love. If attraction were a formula, you could input data into an algorithm and find the perfect match. But love refuses that. People fall for opposites, for impossible connections, for the person who doesn't make sense. And thank goodness. Because what makes love thrilling is precisely its unpredictability. If it followed logic, it would feel like paperwork. Its nonsense makes it sacred. The same is true of hope. Logic might tell someone facing hardship that the odds are against them. Yet people keep fighting, dreaming, and striving. Hope is irrational. It defies statistics. But it's also the engine of survival. Without nonsense hope, humanity would never have explored oceans, cured diseases, or reached the stars. The nonsense of hope is history's secret fuel. Consider play. Children turn sticks into swords, boxes into castles, and rules into worlds. Adults dive into games, sports, and hobbies that achieve nothing practical. Play doesn't make sense, but it's essential. It develops imagination, builds community, and refreshes the soul. The nonsense of play is not wasted time, it's life at its most alive. Even spirituality, whether religious or secular, embraces nonsense. People pray, meditate, chant, or sit in silence, often without clear evidence of outcome. Yet they find peace, connection, transcendence. Rituals that make no rational sense still transform lives. Faith is not about solving nonsense but entering it, embracing mystery as truth. Let's not forget humor. Comedy thrives on absurdity, slapstick, puns, exaggeration. Jokes don't make sense. They twist it. And laughter heals. It bonds strangers, lightens grief, and reveals truth through nonsense. The fact that we laugh at the illogical proves how deeply we need nonsense to survive. Now, think about memory. Our recollections are riddled with errors, gaps, and fabrications. Yet they shape identity. A distorted memory of childhood can guide decisions decades later. Memory doesn't make sense as a perfect record, it's nonsense patched together. But that nonsense sustains continuity, reminding us who we are. The body itself is a carnival of contradictions. We hiccup, blush, sneeze, dream, and sometimes cry when happy. Evolution left us with useless organs, quirky reflexes, and inefficient designs. Biology doesn't make sense, but it works. We are nonsense wrapped in skin. Death, too, is nonsense we can't escape. Consciousness ends, but we can't comprehend our own absence. So we invent stories, heavens, reincarnations, afterlives. Rationally uncertain, emotionally necessary. The nonsense of death rituals gives us a way to bear the unbearable. Without it, grief would crush us. So here's the conclusion. The world never makes sense. And that's not a flaw, it's a feature. Nonsense is not the enemy of order but its companion. It gives life texture, color, and unpredictability. It makes room for wonder, love, art, humor, and hope. If the world were logical, it would be empty. Because it's nonsensical, it's beautiful. And maybe the wisest way to live is not to fight nonsense, but to dance with it. Laugh when things don't add up. Cherish rituals that feel absurd. Love in ways that defy reason. Play, create hope. Grieve all in the nonsense that makes us human. So the next time you shake your head and say, "This doesn't make sense," remember, it was never supposed to. And that's not just okay, it's everything. Asterisk.